You know what time it is. Buckle up and enjoy the ride.
And we are live. Greetings to our loyal WFYL listeners around the world. Welcome back to your Philadelphia live stream, only on the Freedom Station. I want to thank each and every one of you for tuning in, because you still have the right to hear and the right to be heard. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Mike G. As always, with me are Philly Chris and Liberty Lee. And you're listening to Mike G in the morning with The Law Matters. And you can listen to our program every Friday at 7 a.m. Eastern, only on the Freedom Station, WFYL. So let's be heard. I want to remind our listeners that you can participate in the free and open exchange of thoughts and ideas throughout the entire week by visiting MikeGinTheMorning.com. So tell your friends, tell your family, tell your barber, tell your Uncle Jerry, tell anybody who will listen to check us out at MikeGinTheMorning.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and like this video. I also want to remind our listeners about the powerhouse lineup we've got here at the Freedom Station. Kick off your mornings with Scott Adams. Bring you the Scott Adams Show weekdays at 9 a.m. We've got Dan the Man Bongino. Bring you the Dan Bongino Show weekdays from noon to 3 p.m. We've got the headliner, Ben Shapiro. Bring you the Ben Shapiro Show weekdays from 3 to 5 p.m. And finally, we love having him at the Freedom Station family. We've got Michael Knowles. Bring you the Michael Knowles Show weekdays from 5 to 6 p.m. So don't forget to tune in and show him some love. And with that, you know what time it is. Buckle up and enjoy the ride. We got some of our loyal WFYL listeners and the Mike G in the Morning family tuning in. Stacks checking in. Give him a hey now, Philly Chris.
Hey now, Stacks.
We've got Dag Nabbit check.
Dag Nabbit, hey now.
We've got the Finisland checking in. Give him a hey now.
Ladies and gentlemen, to Finisland. Hey now to Finisland.
We got DG checking in. Give DG a hey now.
Hey now, DG. Hey now.
How about Rita? Rita checking in. Give Rita a hey now.
Hey now, Rita. Welcome.
We also got Jeremy checking in. Give Jeremy a hey now.
Hey now, Jeremy. Hey now.
All right. We had an excellent episode last week. We had something truly one of a kind on the Mike G in the Morning program. We had somebody checking in the comments section, crashing, so to speak, and had a lot to say about Dominic. I think Dominic handled that phenomenally well with his response. He did not reach through the screen and grab the guy by the neck or anything like that. They had a respectful, intelligent discussion. That gentleman, John, said that he would be reaching out to join us on the program. We did not. Well, we heard from somebody who purported to be John. We can't confirm that it was John, but they kind of flaked out on us. So we did not have the opportunity to bring John or Imposter John onto the program. We're going to give that one more week. Hopefully everything sorts itself out. But we decided to have Dominic back on the program because there is still a lot going on in the world that we'd like to talk about. Particularly, I want everybody to be cognizant of something. A lot of times when we see things happening, like is happening over in Israel with Palestine, ultimately, you'll have people go to the mainstream media to get their information and look to the experts. Now, I want to be very clear about something. As somebody who's done television, I can tell you that the purported experts are not always experts, and people will rely on this information erroneously. In terms of gun laws, I see this all the time where somebody gets up there and they purport to be a gun law expert. They start talking about this, and this is really on both sides, whether they're pro-gun or anti-gun. And I'll listen to what they're saying, and it's just laden with inaccuracies on both sides. Now, I happen to be a huge gun law nerd. This is what I do from the minute I wake up until the minute I go to sleep. So I can pick something like that out. But it often makes me wonder what happens when we're watching things about other topics with these other purported experts. And these are subjects where I don't know nearly enough to be nitpicky the way I am when it comes to gun laws. And we just take that information in, and people take it as true when it's laden with inaccuracies. We're getting erroneous information. So instead of doing that, what I would like to do on this program is stick to things that we actually know. I know people want to hear somebody get up there and be the authority figure and tell you this is what you have to believe. And I know what I'm talking. Stick to topics of discussion that you know. And I think that one thing that's being lost in this conversation about Israel, people are going out there and talking about what they think is the right thing to do. I think that there are certain more nuanced sort of aspects of this that people are losing sight of. And this is not necessarily solely related to Israel, but when we're talking about war in general, I get this sense that you have a lot of people who take this position, they take their stance as to what should happen without really acknowledging what's going to occur if that strategy were to move forward. And what I mean by that is they're not going to be there, the boots on the ground, and it's easy for people to pick these sides and say, hey, this is what we ought to do when it's overseas and it's not affecting us here on American soil. It's almost, I liken it to somebody's willing to eat a hamburger so long as they don't have to kill the cow. And we're not talking tonight particularly about that conflict, but I think it is important for people to hear the perspective of the reality of war. And who better to discuss that with us on the Mike G in the Morning program than Army veteran Dom Leon. Dom, thank you so much.
What's going on, guys?
I tagged you in there. You didn't expect it. You didn't expect me to tag you in there, did you?
It's a little delayed. I had a little delayed response there, but I'm here. I'm here, brother.
Welcome to the show.
All right. So, Dominic, you know more than anybody about this subject. It's true that people sit at home and they play armchair general as to what should take place, but they're really not aware of the reality.
Well, I kind of lost you there at the end, but here's what my opinion on that. I want to touch on something you said just a few seconds earlier about these purported, professionals, or they know exactly what's going on with whatever, and you being on TV, these experts, and you being on TV, you have firsthand knowledge, knowing that, well, these so-called experts are not always experts, and we, thanks to COVID, know that that's exactly what's been going on. For the first couple of years of COVID, so much information was put out there. And of course, the so-called experts were the people, the talking heads on TV, were all telling us certain things. And then years later, the same people who had vehemently told us that all these things, these details about what was going on were true, then turned around and said, well, it turns out, well, we would have done this or that, but they're not going to take a step back from their point, but they are going to try to correct themselves in the long run. And now I'm just using that as an example, but we've seen examples of that in so many other different areas. When it comes to war, I will say that whatever news we see here in America, I know firsthand when I used to watch reruns of videos or news clippings, like say name a news station, and you would see a news article or something, and they would say something about the war in Afghanistan or Iraq. And one of the things that I noticed is, I said, this is not at all what's going on. Like, why? I don't understand who's saying this. But at the time, of course, I'm not a loud enough voice to speak against it or to try to make sense of it. I'm just one person who knows the truth about something that's going on somewhere else, whereas these media companies, like the mainstream media at the time, were going to report on something else because they had quote unquote experts giving them the information. But when you realize what's really going on, it's like, well, it's like you said, Mike says, they're not really experts. They're getting their information secondhand. And then you ask yourself, what is not only the validity of that secondhand information, but what's behind this person giving them the information? Like, is there an agenda behind them feeding them information on one aspect or another, or about one subject or another? Is this information that's going to fit a certain narrative based on what they need people to follow or not have interest in? This whole issue with Palestine and Israel, I wish people, if I could give people any kind of advice, would be like, stop taking second or third hand people's word for it. And, we live in 2023, the age of the internet. This is the time when you should be questioning every single piece of information that comes your way. And then you, on your own, do your own research and question the validity of that information, and then make your own educated guess or opinion or what have you based on the information you get. If we just blindly believe people's second and third hand accounts of what's going on, we're going to start like sheep following a narrative that is already predetermined by the people feeding us this information. We're going to start going into the directions that they want us to, rather than making our own decisions and our own opinions. The best thing I can say about it too is when I was in college at the College of Staten Island, I had one professor, and this one professor said this one piece of information to me, and he was great. He could care less about politics. He could care less about what was going on with anything outside of academia. He said, college, it's not useless, but it's only meant to serve one purpose, not to give you a certificate, not to give you a diploma. It's meant to make you a better critical thinker. So based on you becoming a better critical thinker, and also the fact that we now learn how better ways to research, we look for better sources while we're doing said research to find better sources of information and get the actual facts. Once you get that idea in your head, be a better critical thinker, and everything that comes your way as far as information, no matter what it is, you should question it, do your own research, and then make your opinions based on that. If we continue to follow blindly what people feed us from outside sources, we're just going to continue on this evil cycle of information, this never-ending narrative that goes one way or the other. We're individuals. We're meant to think with our brains, that God gave us brains to use, and we just don't seem to use them. I don't know what's going on.
Yep. Critical thinking.
That anything I just said makes
It makes sense.
But people today are just following.
Stax Farmstead says. Stax Farm says WMD is in Iraq.
Yeah, right.
Let me tell you one other thing about, you want to know about details about war. One thing I learned about people in the Middle East, it's not good or bad. It's a detail about these people that people really take for granted or might not even understand. Our Americans' concept of time, or at least people in the West, our concept of time is immediate gratification. I want this now, so I will go get this now. In the Middle East, families have a sense of time where they can realistically say, we want this. And then they will train their generations of families. My sons' sons, and my son's sons' great-grandchildren will do what they have to do in that time frame in order to achieve whatever it is that they're trying to get. Their sense of time is completely different from ours. They will spend decades achieving one goal, whereas if we didn't accomplish it by next week, we're already losing our minds. They will go on generations until they can accomplish that goal. So everybody right now is harping on, oh, well, did Israel know or didn't know that we're going to get attacked? It doesn't matter, because this attack could have been planned 10 years ago. And then as 10 years go on, during this time, as Israel's technology gets better, so does Hamas's plan starts to evolve to change based on their information. And then once that information gets to a point where, okay, it hasn't changed, these are the details that we have, even though 10 years have passed, now is our time to strike. So that's their concept of time. We have no idea whether this plan was created 2 weeks ago or if it was created 10 years ago.
Mhm.
Their concept of time is different.
Makes sense. Yeah, big cultural difference.
Sorry, I feel like I'm rambling here.
No, you're good.
Now, when
Like
we
we're
start
trying
to talk about the realities, now when we start to talk about the realities of war, I find on the criminal defense side, you'll have people who are unaware of what jail is really like until they're on the inside. And they might look at it on TV and say, well, I could handle that. It's not all that bad, whatever it may be. And then they get scared straight once they're on the inside. Could you tell us a little bit about what it's like being in combat, even from the very beginning when you first joined the service?
When I first joined, I knew that it was where I really wanted to be because I grew up watching G.I. Joe and playing with, the Army toys and etc. So I always knew I wanted to join the military to some degree. And, as I got older, I realized, well, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it all the way. No disrespect to the reserves or the National Guard, but I just figured if I'm going to do something, I'm not going to go in it halfway. I'm going to do it to the fullest extent.
Mhm.
And you'd be surprised what people see on TV, what they perceive to be the Army. 90% of it is extremely boring.
Mhm.
And it's a lot of, we are constant, every week there's something new to train in. You train with your firearms, you train with survival tactics, you train to be in the field. But even then, you're mostly doing mundane day-to-day things. And it took me a while to figure this out. Like, why is the Army now that I realize, like, the Army I'm in now, why is it so boring? Even though the instructors at the time and every instructor I had after that always seemed to be very intent on everything. It seemed a lot of things seemed very boring. Until later on in life, I realized no, everything has a purpose to try to shape the person you are going to become later on. So you have a sense of purpose, a sense of drive, a sense of integrity, a sense of honor, a sense of self-discipline. And then those traits will follow into other training aspects of your military career. So when you're on the range, for example, and you're training with your rifle, you're not going to lollygag. You're going to have a sense of purpose and you're going to take it extremely seriously. And you're going to try to become as proficient as you can. You're also, one thing a lot of people have a misconception of is that people, let's use last week's example when John said that people like me are combative. Well, when I was in the military, one of the first things in basic training they taught us was that racism, sexism, and anything involved in any kind of ism was not only not allowed, but if you even showed a hint of disrespect or racism or misogynistic behavior or whatever it be, if you even showed a hint of that, they would take disciplinary action against you immediately because it is just not tolerated. There's zero tolerance for anything like that. When it came to gay people at the time, because I had joined in a time where Don't Ask, Don't Tell was still prevalent, it was still enacted. Of course, I couldn't say anything. However, one of the sergeants, that I guess he knew what was going on, and he saw me. I guess maybe back then I was a little bit more whatever. I was a little bit more obvious, let's say. And he said, "Hey," to put it gently. But this one instructor took it. He took his time, and he came up to me and he said, "Hey, now, I don't care what you do on your personal time, as long as you don't do it here. And whatever you do, just be careful. But I'm not saying you can't be who you are, and I'm not against what you're doing. But right now, because of the circumstances, you need to be careful. So whatever you do it outside of prying eyes, and be aware of the situation. Now, when people say that military personnel are homophobic, I will tell you that my entire Army career, I don't remember anybody ever being homophobic. On the contrary, we knew everybody and what they were about and what they were doing, nor did anybody care. The only thing we cared about is, can you do your job? Are you good at your job? And if we're stuck together, can you fire downrange and keep me from getting killed? And I promise you, I'll do the same thing.
Mhm.
I don't care. Now is not the time to talk about what you do in your private time. All I care about is, can you put rounds downrange and can we protect each other right now? That's all I care. And that's all the
Dom, can I
soul.
ask you something?
Yes, sir.
Because you see
Yes.
a lot of corporations today doing all of these seminars for people about all of this sensitivity training and everything like that. It doesn't sound like what you're saying is akin to that. It sounds more like everybody was taught treat everybody with respect. End of
Yes.
discussion. Am
End
I
of this.
getting that right?
That's absolutely right. There was no, it was not, we weren't pinpointing anybody. We weren't trying to point out any specific group. It's, listen, we are all people. You may not like each other, but regardless of the fact, we are still all on the same team. So even if you don't like each other, you will respect each other. That's how they taught us. You will
Was
show each other
was there
respect.
anything about the training? Was there anything about the training or anything like that? I know you went through Ranger School, right? So anything in the training that you thought was surprisingly difficult or that was unexpected? Did you ever have any thoughts of quitting or giving up at any point?
Well, Ranger School, I couldn't quit because I got wavered in because at the time, only combat MOSs could join Ranger School. When I went into Ranger School, I was not of a combat MOS. I was in the middle of reclassing to a different MOS for the purposes of going to Ranger School. So that waiver came with, came with rules saying, hey, we had to go through hoops and ladders to get you this waiver. If you fail, don't show your face around here again. If you are a no-go at Ranger School, I don't want to see you. I don't want to hear from you. So the level of pressure on me was intense. Little did I know that some of the Ranger instructors, the RIs, when I went to Ranger School, were aware of my situation because not everybody can get a waiver. Ranger School is something that a lot of combat MOSs can request, and then once it's available, they can get sent there. My situation was I was a non-combat MOS at the time, so they understood where I was coming from. Plus, they didn't see the patches on me, so they're like, "You're not a combat MOS at the time." Now, it was surprising to me because I hear horror stories about Ranger School. I hear all these different things, and meanwhile, they didn't pin up. They didn't pick me out as an individual because there's so many of us, and they have to really kind of get a hold of everybody and train them equally. But every now and again, you'd hear one of the Ranger instructors say, hey, Airborne, don't fail. Like, let's go. Pick your feet up, get moving. Let's get going. Come on. Where's your battle buddy? All that stuff. Now, again, I'm using very PG language, but, it was a lot more. But needless to say, I did not expect the level of motivation. I expected it to be more of a across the board. This is what we're doing. This is what we're training on. If you fail, get out. If not, we move on to the next thing. And that level of motivation was unexpected. So a lot of people think that they're just itching to kick you out. And in my case, it was the opposite. They were very motivating and they didn't want to see me fail. So that was surprising.
Now, when you get into combat, you said you were a non-combat MOS, so did you plan on not seeing combat?
No, when I first joined the Army, I was kind of oblivious I didn't know that there was even such a thing as a non-combat job as opposed to a combat MOS. When I first joined, I joined as a parachute rigger. So I was packing parachutes for the 18th Airborne Corps, jumping out of planes, pretty much all the time. But that became boring after a while. I was like, well, this is not the Army I thought. You're packing 25 parachutes a day. That's pretty much all you do. You wake up, you do PT, pack 25 parachutes, go back to the barracks, eat a sandwich, rinse, repeat over and over. And I was like, this is pretty boring. So I reclassed. I became a 12 Bravo, which was a combat engineer at the time. So they are there's engineers that build bridges, and they do a lot of different types of engineering jobs, like building bridges or maybe clearing out airfields or what have you. Then there's the 12 Bravos, who our specialty was explosives, demolition type stuff. And then there's 12 Charlies, who are also engineers, but they are more with boats, and they work with boats and they work with different types of equipment. But all in all, we're all combat engineers. But because you're in a combat MOS, it facilitates other schools that you're able to go to, because again, they differentiate combat MOSs to non-combat MOSs. So a parachute rigger going to Afghanistan is not really going to do much but be in the rear with the gear, packing whatever they have, or taking care of the logistics of certain things. Whereas, of course, the 12 Bravos going out there and we're just blowing up stuff.
Mm.
I laughed because it was fun.
Hey, gotta have fun.
Hey,
Thank you.
I hope that
So,
answers your
what do you think are some of the things? So, what do you think are some of the things about war that people wouldn't necessarily understand?
Well, I think it's the decisions that people are forced to make in very tight situations. It's like you said earlier, people can be the armchair quarterback, but unless you're in a situation where you have to make these decisions and you have nanoseconds to make them, it's easy to sit back and say, well, I would have done this. Could you have thought in nanoseconds to make that decision or any other decision? Or would you have trusted your training to make the decisions that you know to make are the right ones? And sometimes you have to make decisions that you are not proud of, and you may have to live with them for the rest of your life. But that decision also saved the lives of a lot of your own people, and maybe even the people that are local to the area. But it's still, that it's going to affect you later on down the line. And that's a sacrifice soldiers are willing to make, because it's what we're here for. There's that old saying, we do the work so that you never have to think about it. We go to war so that people don't have to. I do more before 9 a.m. than you can do in a whole day. But it's all so that you don't have to. They're regular people. They're people out there. And one thing about not just war, but being in the military in general, is that I think people don't realize this. When we joined the military, we took an oath to protect the Constitution from enemies, both foreign and domestic. Now that's right there, that statement, that protecting the Constitution. Protecting the Constitution means I will do everything in my power so that you will always have the right to hate people like me. You can hate me all you want, because I fought for the right for you to do that. Your First Amendment right is a right that I put my life on the line for, along with a lot of other soldiers that I know, both Marines and Army soldiers, Navy. I mean, you name it down the line, there have been servicemen and women who put their lives on the line so that you would have the right to hate them. How ironic.
Very true.
You try to do that in a country like one of some of these other countries, and you're not going to go far.
Yeah, aren't there some rules in place in North Korea where you have to cry on the supreme leader's date of death and all kinds of other things? You're not allowed to smile on that day, or they put you in jail for a long time.
That's right.
Kim Jong-un,
All kinds of crazy laws, right?
he never played golf a day in his life. In his first stroke, he hit an eagle or a hole in one. I don't know. I think those people are immortal, or if that's what they feed the North Koreans, who knows?
Yeah.
I have no idea. That's some ridiculous stuff.
Pretend they're gods.
Yeah.
DG brings up a good point here. DG wants to know, obviously we're thankful to our veterans who went and fought for our Constitution, but isn't there some responsibility on the people at home in our society to do their own part in protecting the Constitution? How do you feel about that?
No. I don't feel that there is any responsibility on a civilian. Civilians, when they're born, don't take oaths of anything. They just exist, and they take advantage or for granted the system that they live in and allow the protecting of the Constitution to people like me. People like me exist so that other people don't have to protect or honor the Constitution. And we see that every day. I mean, how many times do we see politicians trying to circumvent the Constitution just to push whatever they're pushing? They have no respect for the Constitution, but they know that individuals like me are here, we are here to protect the Constitution. But we are the silent ones. We're the ones with no voice, but we're the ones in the background, always making sure that the Constitution is protected. The next line of that is always from enemies, both foreign and domestic. And a lot of people forget that. People say, oh, they're going to call in the army. Yeah, but who's the one violating the Constitution? If you call in the army, we're going to try to go against the people that are moving against the Constitution, not using us as just, their own personal bodyguards. The military is very aware of certain things, and I sincerely doubt that the military is ever going to be used against its own citizens. If that would be the case, they would bring in soldiers from any other part of the world, but never American citizens and American soldiers against its own citizens. So being that we're going to protect the Constitution, against enemies, both foreign and domestic, the domestic part is unlikely because, the politicians are not going to try to use us against their own people, meaning other politicians. It's unlikely. We're not going to go to war with ourselves. This whole talk about civil war in the United States, I think that's just one of the most unlikely scenarios that would ever happen. Plus, I don't think that the people who are against the Second Amendment and against guns and against firearms of any type are going to want to start a war with people who have a bajillion guns and a bajillion firearms and an endless amount of supply of rounds. They're not going to want to do that.
But isn't that because people often talk about the purposes of the Second Amendment to prevent a tyrannical government? And
right.
You're saying that it's not likely to happen. Is it not likely to happen because they wouldn't want to do it and they've got pure motives? Or is it not likely to happen because the Second Amendment does exist and there would be resistance even from people within the service who would refuse to obey unlawful, unconstitutional orders?
Well, that's already in our general orders. When you're in the military, you're trained on your general orders. I'm sure you've watched Full Metal Jacket and you've watched the drill instructor say, "What's your first general order?" I will not abandon my post until I'm properly relieved. What is your second general order? What is your third? One of those general orders say that you will not follow an unlawful order. You can disobey an unlawful order as long as you can show that it is unlawful. And if it doesn't matter who gives you this unlawful order, it could be a general. If you know it is an unlawful order and you can prove so, you can disobey it without any repercussion. However, there will be a process for it. But if you can prove that it is an unlawful order, you can and should disobey it. Now, going back to the point of, are there servicemen and women who don't want to follow those orders and are also ready once they become veterans and civilians, are they going to do that? I think those are the people who want to uphold those same values the most above anybody else. So I don't believe that they're going to take up arms against their own citizen, let alone other servicemen and women. So I think that's just a lot of, it's one of more of those subjects that just sounds exotic on TV and it sounds cool to say on radio talk shows and all these things, but the likelihood of that happening seems very far-fetched. If anything, we're not going to have the Civil War like we knew back in the original Civil War. It's not going to be guns blazing and everybody going out there like the Purge. This is going to be like something, for example, that happened not too recently. It happened in Vegas, where people hacked the grid and they were able to do whatever they did to their financial system in the city of Las Vegas. I don't know if you remember that. That happened a few weeks ago. And that's the kind of warfare that we're expecting to have nowadays, where we're gonna be infiltrated by people who know how to work computer systems. It's not going to be guns and ammo. It's going to be a war of minds and a war of the internet and a war of the intellectual. It's no longer going to be guys like us.
Now, you said that you don't think. You said you don't think that the citizens have an obligation to protect the Constitution because they didn't take an oath. But I think that to some degree, if you are somebody who believes in our Constitution and you want the Constitution to be adhered to by our government, right? Because the whole point of the Constitution is to limit the authority of the government and protect our rights from the government, then you do, in a sense, have an obligation to do what you can to uphold that Constitution. What I mean is that the Constitution is only as valid as the system that's implementing it. What do I mean by that? Well, you can have the Constitution, and many of us study the Constitution and study what our founding fathers intended certain things to mean. A lot of what we see today in terms of legislation and government action would violate some of those principles. And the way it's gotten that way is, number one, you have the legislature passing these laws that are unconstitutional, and then you have the courts upholding these laws that are unconstitutional. And if the citizens don't elect officials who respect the Constitution and want to abide by our Constitution, well, then we have no Constitution. We have no meaningful Constitution. The Constitution has no teeth. So in that sense, if you want our Constitution to exist, citizens have no choice but to do so.
I agree with everything you said. However, based on everything you just said, there's also the other side of that. They have the obligation, but what ability do they have other than voting in the right people? And how exactly do they know whether or not they're voting in the right people who are going to uphold the Constitution when it comes time? And as far as the courts are concerned, don't we have a Supreme Court in place to actually make sure that the Constitution is being upheld in a lot of cases? So when you talk about courts not holding up, they're not respecting the Constitution or honoring it. Well, I'm not going to disparage lawyers, but I'm just saying any good lawyer, worth their salt, and as soon as they see that it's unconstitutional, wouldn't that be their first defense? Like, hey, wait a minute, like you guys are holding my client under this, but or that, but it says all unconstitutional. And furthermore, not only can I say that, but I'm going to show you how it's unconstitutional. And based on this entire case should be dismissed because the Constitution does not allow it. Now, I don't think that people are obligated.
Yeah. Unfortunately, if you go back and you look at a lot of Supreme Court jurisprudence, you would be left scratching your head if you went back and looked at a lot of the Supreme Court jurisprudence, unfortunately.
I agree with you. And that, unfortunately, is on both sides. That's from either Republicans or Democrats. But what is what's the takeaway from that? That people only really consider the Constitution when it's directly affecting them. But when it's affecting somebody else to their benefit, they're not going to acknowledge it. As long as it's not affecting them directly,
right?
They're not going to pay attention to it. Right now, what's the biggest thing between liberals and conservatives? That they want to cancel everybody and they want to silence people and censor people. And what they're not realizing is that, well, that's unconstitutional for you to actually ask for that. Mm-hmm. But what you also fail to realize is that you can silence everybody you don't like. Let's say they accomplish that goal. Well, then they're going to start attacking each other, because now there's nobody else left to censor but each other. And now they're going to just eat themselves from the inside, and they're just going to be left with nothing. And then who's going to rise up? The people that originally were there in the first place. And it's just one evil circle that keeps on going, and nobody takes the time to pay attention to what's going on. They just want to keep fighting and keep arguing and keep having these dumb discussions about things that are point blank unconstitutional. That should once something is unconstitutional and you can prove it, that should be.
We have a couple of questions from. That would be great. We have a couple of questions that I think are along the same lines. Dag Nabbit says, what about the generals that are now so-called woke that seem to ignore the Constitution? And Stacks says something along those lines, says, just in general, how does Dom feel about the current state of the armed forces?
Well, and I got to say, Dag Nabbit is a really cool name. And I'm going to say that. As far as the generals, I am going to say something. I have to be careful on how I put this. I don't want to sound slanderous to any general. And what a lot of people don't realize is, let me see how I can put this. Generals are probably the only people that you will ever see the portrayal of them in movies where people say, do generals really have that reach? Do they really have that ability to just start mini wars in countries that probably a lot of people never even heard of? And then there's little conflicts and little wars, and generals are supplying weapons or information on one side or the other, not involving American soldiers, but it's in their best interest because it creates bigger conflicts. Because I want people to remember one thing. What is the business of the armed forces?
War.
Exactly. And when there is no war, there is no business.
Right. Big business.
And if there is no business, then the leadership is going to be forced to retire as it trickles down. The lack of business means CEOs and CFOs and everybody, managers, in any corporation, that's how it is. The money starts going down, people have to start getting let go. So it's in their best interest to have a war or to have conflicts because it keeps the money flowing. Unfortunately, that's a lot of generals are involved in that kind of thing, but we don't ever hear it because it's not in the country's best interest to hear about it. Now, people are going to say, well, how do you know that? I want you to prove it to me. That's just it. It's so difficult to prove that unless you're on the inside of it, unless you're seeing it from the inside like I was, you're not ever going to even give it a second thought. But that, sadly, is one of the realities of what we're living through today. Now, going to, what was the name of the other person's the question? It was Dag Nabbit and somebody else?
Yeah, that was Stacks. He also posted something by
Yeah, what's the state?
Stacks.
It's sad. The state of the armed forces today is pretty sad because, people have, I think the vast majority of the country has grown to have a negative thought about the military. And I think that, well, in part, it is the military's own fault because they seem to want to cling on to these archaic type of ways of handling certain things. And I mean, I'll be very honest with you and very candid. Everybody's talking about gays in the military, transgendered, and everybody seems to have a problem with that. If people only understood how the military works, you would not care. What if that transgendered person, if you understood how much money is wasted in the military, somebody's sex change would not be on your radar. Money wasted for everything.
Wow.
I'm going to explain something. How much does
Do you think it's a distraction? Do you think it's used as an intentional distraction, perhaps?
I think so. To some degree it is. But let me explain something, how money is spent in the military. How much does a lug nut on your car cost?
A few dollars.
How much does a military lug nut on one of the LMTVs or all the newer vehicles cost?
Probably like $50.
More like the $300s, $400.
Really?
Money is wasted left and right for nonsense.
It's insane.
And one other thing is that person is like, well, what if this
Can we make a lug nut store for the military?
Yeah.
Let's get that contract.
Yeah, lugnuts.mil.
Mike G. Lugnuts.
Yeah, one other thing about, the jobs in the military is not everything is a combat. As I explained earlier, I was in a non-combat MOS until I reclassed to a combat MOS. Do you know how many logistics personnel they are, support personnel they are? There is so many members of the armed forces who are never in their lives going to come near combat. This is not World War I, where the cook on a naval ship now has to get on a 50 cal and start shooting down the enemy. This is not something that's going to happen. There are cooks.
Hmm.
There are logistics personnel. There are supplies. There are drivers. There are a number of people who are, their combat abilities and capabilities are completely irrelevant to the job that they're doing. So let's say somebody is a transgendered person in the military, but all they do is logistics. That's all they do. Am I worried? Oh, what are we going to do in a foxhole? Nothing, because that person's counting rounds. They're not in a foxhole with me. So let them do whatever they're doing as long as they can count the rounds that I need. That's all I care about. What they do is not my business. So when people say, I don't want my tax dollars going to people having sex changes. If you only understood how money is wasted on an extreme level in the military, somebody's transgendered operation would be the last thing on your radar. You would say, I want an account of the $300 that went to that lug nut. Why did the muffler on this little thing, scooter or whatever, cost $2,000? That's nonsense. And you're worried about somebody's, people are focusing on the wrong things, and no one's holding the military accountable for the excessive waste of funds year after year after year. But like you said, perhaps this is just a distraction. Let's put the transgendered and people in the army at the forefront to distract the civilians while we waste billions of dollars over here. Didn't the army or didn't one of the military branches just lose a fighter jet not too long ago?
Mhm.
Ask the civilians, where is it? And it turned out to be in the ocean somewhere. And you know what they do with that? They'll say, well, let's just write that one off.
Write it off. Yeah.
Write it off. We just lost $1 billion airplane.
Yeah. No big deal.
President Biden gives Ukraine how many billions of dollars and says, oh, man, I guess that was put a decimal point somewhere that was wrong. Oh, well, they got it now. And you're worried about somebody's trying to give me a break. The state of the military, again, it's...
What was the deal about the day before 9/11? What was the deal,
Mhm.
Chris? Do you know about this? The day before 9/11?
Oh yeah, when
They
the
were
day before
supposedly-
Rumsfeld mentioned that I think like $4 trillion was missing, something like that. Yeah,
3 is
Some
sticking out in my
ridiculous
head,
amount of
but it was
money.
something with a T.
Something
So
like
it's trillion with a T.
Trillion. 2,
It
3,
was
something like that.
like that.
And that plane mysteriously took out that part of the
Yeah.
Pentagon where the records were kept. So
And didn't also somebody from the Twin Towers, somebody big, I think it was a financial person or something, started, one of the owners of the Twin Towers, sold off a lot of their own equity in the building, right? Like I think the day or 2 days before that. So
had
I'm not-
special terrorist insurance too. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. We're just asking questions. You can look it up if you
Yeah.
want to learn more about this
Yeah,
stuff.
right. Yeah.
No, we're just asking
I beg everybody
questions, that's
not
all.
take our
Bikini.
So, Dom, do you
Yes.
think that there are outside entities, like somebody's selling the lug nuts, right? I joked about we need to open up a lug nut store for the military, but somebody's selling those. So there are these private corporations or individuals who are making tremendous amount of money on these markups.
Oh, of course. I mean, it could be, let's say, it could be an American name on the vehicle. It doesn't mean all the parts on the vehicle are American made. You know, it could be, all right, so here's a little tidbit of information. And I really suggest people look this up. For a small amount of time, the M16A2, which nobody uses anymore. Now they're onto the more sophisticated firearms. But at the time, M16A2, does anyone know who made those? Come on.
McDaniels, maybe?
Cue the Jeopardy music. Da-na.
I don't remember.
So it was a subsidiary of Mattel, the same people who made Barbie.
Oh, okay. There you go.
It was a subsidiary of them. So it was an American-made rifle, of course. Now, does anybody know who the firing pin was made by?
No.
The same people who make bootleg iPhones in China.
Wonderful. Is that why they jammed all the time?
Oh, it was, listen, don't get me started on that. I learned a whole thing called sports just to unjam. It was just a nightmare.
Right.
You don't want to be started on that. But I mean, people look at the bigger, when you look at a rifle, you look at the entire thing, but it's like a vehicle. Those things have components. and you could have 10 different companies making 10 different components for this one rifle, each of them having a contract with the subsidiary of a bigger company.
Mm.
So they all have subcontracts. Let's say an American-made military vehicle is made by one company. They have a contract for the engine to be made by a separate company, and then all the subsequent parts can then be also subcontracted out and made by another company, contracted to someone else, God knows where. Doesn't make a difference. But all we're looking at is, well, that's an American-made vehicle. Mercedes, we are understanding that it's a German vehicle, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Majority of them are assembled in Mexico. Wouldn't that make them a Mexican vehicle? Parts and
True. And I think it's Daimler Chrysler now, right? Mercedes.
yeah. And I think the majority of Fords, I think, are made overseas, but it's an American company.
Right.
Right. Again, so I mean, are we gonna have a company that only keeps track of these things, or are people gonna continue looking at just the distraction?
Mm-hmm. Don't look over here.
I'm on a ramble. I don't know. I'm like a ramble.
DG raises a point. DG says no, all tax dollars matter. So
They should.
Yeah, and people have the right to voice their dissent, but I think there's more to the story, right?
Well, people should be aware of where their tax dollars are going. But I mean, who wants to get into those mathematical discussions with people who are going to talk to you in economics language?
Mm-hmm.
Nobody wants that. No, as the saying goes, ain't nobody got time for that. People have to go to work and live their lives. They're going to complain about it, but nobody will take the time to try to research it and find out what's really behind it.
Just keeps happening.
And it will continue until people actually voice their concern and voice their, like what's going on. They want to know.
Mm-hmm. Let's head to the Capitol.
But quietly and orderly fashion.
And peacefully, yes.
Peacefully, yes.
Yeah.
And no bison hats, please.
Didn't somebody? Interesting. I want to, because we're coming towards the end of the hour, I want to talk a little bit about what happened last week when the gentleman showed up in the comments and made those accusations against you. I think you handled it phenomenally well, considering the circumstances and the types of things that he said. Liberty was saying that the stolen valor comment really, really irritated her, because for someone to go overseas and lay their life on the line and risk it all, and then to have something like that said to them is just this disgusting slap in the face. But it seemed that somewhere in the middle, the gentleman started to realize that he was in the wrong for saying those things. And, having that kind of a conversation with these people is important, because it became very clear that he had never had any sort of a conversation with somebody who thought any differently than he did. And what was going through your head when these comments started viral?
That's what he was taught to think. Those were his exact words.
This is told to think that way.
Yeah. This is what we're told to think.
Mm-hmm.
And listen, so when he first made those comments, I was bothered. Obviously, I made it known. I didn't accept the apology right away. I was very perturbed about it, but I had to keep my cool, and I had to think about the nature of the situation. And not to sound corny, but I mean, I'm sure you've read The Art of War, Sun Tzu. He says, you don't disrupt an enemy when they're making a mistake. You just leave them alone. Mm-hmm. So the only response I could have had to that was what I had, because when he said that that's what he's told to say, or that's what he's told to think. And then, he said, you people are combative, and that's what we're told, and you're this, and you're homophobic, and somebody has to question your... I was like, it's funny, because that's what I hear day in and day out, that people like me or people like us, we're combative, that we're homophobic, that stolen valor comment. However, it dawned on me immediately. I said, this person is being combative. Mm-hmm. They don't even know the nature of my sexuality, and yet it's so easy for them to slander me in this way. And I've said I haven't said one thing to this person. So I think that's what drove me to kind of really go nice and easy into the whole thing. But then, as I'm thinking after the show, as I'm thinking to myself about the entire situation, I really want to reach out to people. I really would like to reach out to John and people like John, because I think one detail that we might have looked over is this person clearly knows that what he's being told may or may not be the truth. Because just by the fact that he's listening to the show or watching the show live, he already understands that he needs to search out for the truth on different terms and be careful about it, because he's surrounded by people who are against you or against people like us. He's against, like he said, Mike, you guys are the topic of conversation at the dinner table at his house quite frequently. So I think that by him watching the show, it might be, there's a level of it where he's thinking there are different perspectives and different ways to look at things that I'm just not allowed to see. And if I just gave myself an opportunity to do that, I would maybe come up with my own conclusions and my own individual thought, rather than just be led on by the ideals of the people who surround me. So I'm not going to take his approach towards me too personally, because I have to be careful and perhaps be exactly the opposite of what he's been told that we are, and show him that we are not those things. Quite the contrary. You have demonstrated that you are everything you said I was.
Right.
And we have to show him that. And once it's clear, then it's like, well, you know what? I just said all these things about this guy, and he hasn't said one thing. He turned it around on me, and now it's really coming up to me clearly where I might be wrong. And now I have to be more receptive to a different point of view. And I think there are so many people out there who are willing to do it. I'm not buying into our narrative or our political beliefs or whatever, but I also don't want them to buy into other people's. I want people to gather their own information and come up with their own individual assessment of what's going on. That's what we should be doing. We shouldn't be trying to get people, when everybody says, oh, we're going to red pill this person. Why? Don't red pill people. Just present them with different ideas and let them make their own decisions. The fact that everybody wants to force a different perspective on everybody else because just because we think that we know the truth, guess what? These people that believe the opposite of us, they truly believe that what they know is their truth. So it's going to be a constant battle between us, but nobody's taking the time to present a different perspective to anybody, to them to then formulate a different idea of what is actually going on. Give them the opportunity to assess a different kind of reality and put into their head, there might be different ways to think about things than I've been led on to do.
Good point.
You know, that's a good point you raise about offering them a different perspective and having them think about it. There was something that happened at a local grocery store, I think it was last week, and they ended up locking down the grocery store for a period. And some people were posting it on one of these neighborhood apps, and there were people in the comments saying, well, this is why people need to carry firearms. And then, of course, there were other people chiming in saying things along the lines of, no, if more people carried, we'd have more gun nuts on the streets with guns and everybody would be in danger and everything like that. And it just shows that these are people who don't know regular people who happen to own and carry firearms. And I've had this experience on numerous occasions where somebody doesn't even understand the concept of a civilian carrying a firearm. Perhaps they were raised in New York or raised in New Jersey, and they're taught that only the police officers and the criminals have firearms. And so a lot of times when I meet these people and we start to have an honest discussion, they realize they know a whole lot less about the idea of a law-abiding citizen carrying to protect themselves and their loved ones than they thought. And when you go out to a place like in Oklahoma or like you in North Carolina, and it's just simply a part of everyday life, you quickly realize that the entire country is not New York, New Jersey, and Los Angeles. And maybe just because you live in New York, New Jersey, or Los Angeles doesn't mean that you know everything there is to know about this sort of thing. And if you just talk to them about your experience, then many times they realize that the way they thought things were aren't necessarily true. They have a caricature of us as gun owners in their heads, right?
I think it goes.
Because they don't know any in real life.
I think it
They
goes.
don't look at us like their neighbor.
Yeah, I think it goes back to when you said, remember that this 19-year-old is going to tell me about life. So every major city where they have very strict gun controls is probably like that 19-year-old that thinks they know everything about life until it's been presented to them in a different perspective. It's funny. The one thing I think
things are different in different parts of the country.
Yeah, the one thing I think about is people probably know more gun owners than they think they know, because a responsible gun owner is not going to go around telling everybody they have guns. A responsible concealed carry person is not going to go around telling people I have a concealed carry. So people may know a lot more people who have firearms, who have concealed carry permits than they even realize. And when they say, well, we're going to have more gun nuts and more people and more shootings, then these people are living under a rock. They're not paying attention to their surroundings. It's never been, well, let me rephrase that because that's wrong. There have been instances of people who are law-abiding firearm owners who have, committed crimes. But the majority of things we see from gun owners are people come in willing to commit a crime, and it is a law-abiding citizen who then saves countless amounts of, like this happened in a church, I think I remember if it was Texas, where somebody tried to go into a church and shoot, and then somebody shot the assailant. Was that Texas?
Jack Wilson.
Yeah. Right. It was the law-abiding gun owner
Jack Wilson,
saved
Texas
in that church. So now that attacker might have been a law-abiding, lawful carrying gun owner as well. But are you going to consider both of them gun nuts? Or are you going to consider one person was mentally disabled or mentally not right to have a firearm, but it was another person who had a firearm lawfully who saved countless lives in that church? You can't have it both ways. You either have to see things for what they really are, or you don't. But you cannot just go around saying we're going to have all these gun nuts. Because trust me when I tell you, if somebody comes around with a gun shooting up a lot of people, and that one person has a gun, could be male or female, and they shoot the person who is a threat to everybody, and he or she just saved your life, are you going to get up and say, you're a gun nut too? This person came in shooting and I can't believe you did that. No, you're going to say, oh my God, thank you for saving my life. Can I buy you a sandwich?
There you go.
That's what you'll say. Thank you for saving my life.
Time for a sandwich.
Time for a roast beef.
It's so
That's
true. Right. It's so true. And it's almost as if they think just because they don't know somebody who fits that mold, who's a law-abiding gun owner, just because they don't know any, that they don't exist, that because they don't know any people they perceive to be normal to own firearms and carry firearms, that they think that simply doesn't exist. I had a conversation with somebody within the last year or so who lives in a suburb of Pennsylvania, and he was saying that his area is not very diverse, and they only had a couple of minorities on the school board or whatever it was, and that he encountered a lot of racism in the area. And he asked me what my time in school was like. I said, well, listen, I went to school in New York, and really growing up, racism wasn't a thing. We had mixes of everybody in school. And, it wasn't until I traveled the country and saw in other places that things weren't quite the way they were in New York that I saw different perspectives. He said, yeah, that's when you got into the real world. And I said, no, I don't think that New York City is not the real world. I think it is very much the real world.
Right.
You just find different things in different parts of the country and among different cultures.
Sure.
That's all. So
Well, I
it
think-
kind of reminds me of what we're talking about. People are not
I-
always exposed to these different ideas.
I think people sometimes live in they have a very, like blinders, they have a very narrow view of what their real world is.
Mhm.
People, like, let's say even in my area of North Carolina, who've never left the area, have never left the state, say, oh, well, you're in the real world coming from New York. And it's like, you only know this area. So this is the only sense of reality that you understand. New York is a completely different reality. California is a completely different reality. You know, when I was growing up, I thought people from California were not tough. I said, these guys are all fighting and shooting each other, but they're Californians. They're not tough. I was like a thought in my head when I was a child. But that just goes to show you, because my reality was in New York. So people that were outside of New York to me were like, you kid, there's no possible way for you to be tough. You're not from New York. How ridiculous is that? So when somebody says, oh, well, you're in the real world, like,
Right.
you are from some town in some dusty suburb of Oklahoma. What do you know about what reality outside of this immediate area?
Right.
Not disparaging anybody from a dusty village in
Right.
Oklahoma.
And you know,
Of course not.
different people having different perspectives in those situations. It's important that they talk to each other to learn this stuff.
Mhm.
Listen,
But
don't gotta
Dom,
live out of land.
you mentioned people not being tough outside of New York. A lot of people find it. I at least found it tough to think that somebody was tough. I found it difficult to think that somebody was tough if they had an Australian accent. And now we have Alexander Volkanovski challenging Islam for the title on Saturday in Abu Dhabi.
There we go.
Volkanovski is a tough dude. It was a very close fight last time.
Yeah.
I do think that Islam won the last fight. Some people had Volkanovski winning the last fight. I could have seen it going either way, but I do think that Islam won the last fight. I think they got it correct on that. What do you think we're going to see this weekend between Islam and Volkanovski? And what do you think we're going to see in Usman versus Hamza?
Okay, so when it comes to Volkanovski and Islam, I have to go with Islam. And I'm going to tell you why. You don't get better at something by not doing it. And while Volkanovski has spent a long time not being active, Islam has continued to compete and continue to stay active. Again, it's the same thing with firearms. You own a firearm, but you have to continue to go to a range to become proficient at it. Just because you own it doesn't mean you're good at it. You don't get good at not doing something. So as Islam has maintained that active status, Volkanovski has not been as active to a degree where he's like, well, should I go in this weight class or this weight class? As soon as you start jumping weight classes, you're bored. You're not doing anything. Islam is not doing that. Islam is very set in his weight class, and he's been active. And he's from that school of Khabib, man. Those guys are those guys are tough, man. I'm not saying Volkanovski's not tough, but again, you don't get better at something by not doing it. And Islam has stayed very active. Now, when it comes to Usman versus Hamza, I think Hamza has also been very inactive, and Usman is coming off of a loss. The thing about that is that Usman, it's not the first time he's lost. So he's not losing is not something that he's not familiar with. It just depends on your character of a person and how you deal with it. But Hamzat has been very inactive for a very long time. He actually had to move gyms because I think something happened in his gym where there was some kind of controversy with the promotion in the gym, and then he had to switch gyms. Those things affect you. So as devastating as a fighter as he is, I think Usman has the advantage of the experience and the desire to just not lose again. And remember, this is a guy that was being compared to GSP not too long ago. So you've got those comparisons. You got the desire to not lose, and his experience and the championship experience and the caliber of fighter he is. For as much as I like Khamzat Chimaev, I think Khamzat is just biting off a little bit more than he can chew. He's going up too fast. The majority of fighters will go up rankings and they'll get seasoned, but he's the hype train. And I think his hype train might be derailed because he's going to go up against a guy who's got enough to back it up. So my money is on Islam.
That's an interesting point because Khamzat was. It's an interesting point because Khamzat ran through the first few guys, and then he had the opportunity to fight Gilbert Burns, who I thought that was the first real legitimate test, right? Okay, now he's fighting somebody who's the real deal. And they had a very, very close fight. That one could have also gone either way.
And Gilbert knocked him down. Gilbert gave him a fight that Khamzat was not aware that he would even bring to him. And Burns knocked him down. And I think when he knocked him down, the look on his face was like, oh man, I just got knocked down. I've been smoking through everybody, and now all of a sudden I'm fighting a guy who can dish it out. What was the first guy he fought? I'm not going to say no name because I don't want to, disrespect the person. But during their scrum in the media, he was laughing at him. He's like,
unranked.
I'm a veteran and I'm a jiu-jitsu black belt. And what did Khamzat do? He's like, okay, yeah. He laughed at him. And what ended up happening? He got knocked out in 15 seconds. This is the seasoned veteran. But this guy, for a seasoned veteran, was not even in the top 20, I think. So the level of competition wasn't there. Right. And then every consecutive other guy, nobody that Khamzat has fought, with the exception of Gilbert Burns, has been to the caliber of an Usman. That's just the reality. The guys that Usman has done what GSP done, right, and he has lapped the entire division. Khamzat hasn't even come close to that. Just to put it into perspective.
So we got Dom's predictions. We'll have you back on. We're gonna have you back on to see how they panned out.
Whenever you're on, I'm here for you guys.
Thanks, Tom.
Be my pleasure.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us. That's all time we got for today. Stick around for We the People of Constitution Matters. Pastor David Whitney, Professor Phil Duffy. We miss you, Ellie. Daddy loves you.